Man, this Ultimate series has just brought us what has to be the craziest Cap and Bucky through line that I've ever seen. So with that said, if you're enjoying these videos, be sure to drop a like, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and don't forget to hit that bell up top to get all notifications. Alright, so going into Ultimates issue 22, we're shown a number of flashbacks alongside of what's happening now as a way to put a bit of emphasis on what time has done to two brothers from a different mother, starting with July 4th of 1923. When Stephen Grant Rogers and James Buchanan Barnes were both born in the same hospital on the same day. Then from here we jump to 1926 after Steve lost his father, but fortunately with Bucky's family living next door, they were able to help out, especially with all of Steve's health problems. And it worked out almost as if it was fate or destiny. And then we jump over to 1930 where the two were like 7 years old and Bucky's giving Steve a noogie. And there was always this concern that Bucky was going to hurt Steve because the kid was fragile. And the two would have this common dynamic where Steve would laugh and tell Bucky to let go, and Bucky would always say, "Make me." And even back then, Steve would try to make sure to tell the teacher like, "I'm okay," so Bucky wouldn't get in trouble. But fast forward to now, when Steve puts somebody in the headlock, they are definitely not okay. But jumping forward to this point, March 18th of 2026, after the Ultimates took down Hand, the next on their list is the Grand Skull, which is what brings us back to Fatherlandville with Captain America and its civilian troops, who have been getting wrecked pretty bad. But the idea now is, with Hand out of the way, this is the Ultimates' best opportunity to take down the Grand Skull. And there's a moment here where Cap asks, "How many did we lose?" And Wanda tells him they don't know, because her brother Pietro's bringing in the wounded faster than they can count. Meanwhile, Vision has the raw numbers, and he's like, "Hey, it's not looking good," with 119 confirmed dead and 326 wounded, and that's only expected to get worse. And now this leads into a moment where one of the wounded, he tries to talk to Cap, but this guy's hurt pretty bad. So the Cap more or less tells him to take it easy, like don't try to talk. He lets the guy know like, "You're okay, soldier, you're gonna be just fine." But then this leads to the Cap then telling Wanda that this really isn't a place for a child. But in her case, after leaving Emma's school, where many of the other mutant children were trained to do bad things with their powers, she's glad that she's finally in a place and a position where she can help. So she tells Cap like, "Please don't tell me to leave." So he lets her stay and he tells her that he's proud of her. But going back to Cap's conversation with Vision, at this point Steve's convinced that they almost made their way in. He thinks that he saw a path, and with a little help from Luke Cage and his Avengers, they could probably make it happen. But on the other hand, Vision, he presses X for doubt, because he's observed that the opposing troops, the Red Skulls, have highly advanced hand weapon systems. And even with Hand taken down, they've stockpiled enough rations and ammunition to be able to hold out for months. So the way Vision sees it, it would be more efficient for Steve to take his troops elsewhere. But Cap does not want to leave because he knows the Grand Skull's in there with no other place to go. And there's a moment here where Vision's like, "This is bigger than our past, Steve. We're fighting for the future." And it's right there where Steve is like, "You have changed. The old you wouldn't have seen the distinction." And that in itself just kind of goes back to when the Vision was just Jim Hammond, the android Human Torch, and how not long after Cap was thawed out and Cap rescued him from that damage control facility. After that, for a while, Jim was like that only person who knew Steve before the modern day. So Steve could talk to him about things like when Tony died, because Jim knew Steve and he knew what he was fighting for during the war. And Steve still sees that fight for good the same way to this day. So now that Jim Hammond has become Vision, and he's talking about switching their tactics and fighting for the future, that immediately has Steve like, "Man, you changed," because good old Jim wouldn't have seen a distinction. And that's not even a bad thing on Vision's part, but really it's just another example of how time can change people. And we'll see more of that as this continues. But again, the reason why Steve is so determined to push forward here is because he knows the Grand Skull is closed. Because without the support from Hand and access to their teleportation system, Steve knows that the Grand Skull is trapped inside. And he's like, "I can feel it." But another thing that makes it complicated as far as them getting in is the fact that inside the Grand Skull is being guarded by 10,000 heavily armed men. These Red Skulls who are wearing babies as flak jackets, because these dudes are about as hardcore as wet toilet paper. But then it's here where things kind of randomly go in their favor. Because when Ren Montgomery, the girl we met in issue 16, calls for Cap, she lets him know that he's got a call from an old friend. So Steve's like, "Who is it?" And she tells him, "He says he's the Red Skull." And the look on Steve's face is like, "I know you flarking line." And now come to find out, this is John Walker, who we were first introduced to in issue 10, with him being a longtime true believer of the Red Skull content since he was a kid. But long story short, when he eventually got his origin box from Tony Stark, John Walker then took that to the Grand Skull, who he was around for about 16 months until Jim Hammond dropped that fire on his head, giving him the ultimate facelift, which eventually left John Walker with nothing left up there but a Red Skull. Which of course then led him to believing that he had some divine purpose after. because now, as the Red Skull, he's reaching out to Steve and the Ultimates to help them take down the Grand Skull. Because currently John Walker's leading a small group of breakaway Red Skulls, who all collectively made up about 15% of the Grand Skull's followers. So Steve basically tells him here, man, I thought you was dead. And that's where Walker, as the new Red Skull, he's just like, John Walker did die that day, and he rose in his place, because he believes that he's the second coming of the Red Skull. But before Steve really gets the chance to dismiss all of this foolishness, because he knows that Walker just wants to use him and the Ultimates so he can take the Grand Skull's place. But at the end of the day, he has a way to get Captain America and the others inside, right now. Because he has followers inside, he has detailed schematics, and a direct path to the Grand Skull, with minimal bloodshed. So Steve goes for it, because really his other options are only either to listen to Vision and take the fight elsewhere, or continue to lose men with a direct attack, which is getting them nowhere. So Cap takes a small team to go with the Red Skull's plan. But before they go, he apologizes to Pietro, as far as having to put a kid in this position, because he has a special part in this plan and it's very important. And Pietro's like, hey, I want to do it. I can do it. And then he's like, by the way, my Ultimate's code name's gonna be Quicksilver. And when I saw that, I was like, yeah, we kind of been calling you that. But even still, with this small team going in with Cap, the Red Skull's plan goes as follows, with him saying, now listen, Captain, do exactly as I say. First, you'll need a diversion. The Grand Skull fears you. He knows you have superhumans. They do not. While their attention is focused on the North Wall, you'll follow the map I provided through the maze of underground escape tunnels, thus avoiding the combatant drones, disintegrator beams, the adaptoid array, the hypersonic ICMBs, easy peasy. My men will be waiting for you at the entrance with disguises. And of course, when Cap gets inside, he's like, I'm not wearing that. But once they're in, we see Quicksilver go to work, with his special job being to snatch up all the babies. So each one of these guys is seeing these kids disappear and they're just like, oh snap, who's gonna protect me? And following this, not too far away, the Grand Skull sees a few of his men get picked off by some arrows, followed by Cap's shield. But the Grand Skull, he's got something for that, because he just deflects it with some eye beams, and he's just like, yeah, nice try, Cap, I upgraded. Because he's not trying to end up like Walker and get caught slipping out here. But then the Grand Skull says here, Steve, it's amazing the technology they have today, isn't it? Not like when we were kids. And now heading into this, Steve, he knows who the Grand Skull is. Because even after their fight at Castletown, heading into the Ultimates version 3.0, Steve had basically taken the Grand Skull's words when it came to the idea of inspiring others to follow the Ultimates. Because when the Grand Skull started talking, Steve immediately recognized him as someone he's heard talk for most of his life. And that even happens now when Steve tells the Grand Skull to take off his mask so he can see his face. And the Grand Skull says, make me, while throwing some bombs at him. So Steve parries those bombs and they blow up right in the Grand Skull's face, making him take off that mask. And that's where he sees underneath that mask is a 102-year-old Bucky Barnes, who doesn't look too bad, all things considered. But now what I want you guys to keep in mind going into this is that for the past 12 issues, this hasn't been so much about Captain America versus the Grand Skull, as it's been more so really a countdown to the moment where Steve and Bucky would finally meet again. And really, it wasn't until now where we were finally getting to see the history behind this universe's Steve Rogers and Bucky Barnes. Because this time around, with them being born on the same day, as opposed to being closer to 1 year apart, this telling of the story makes their childhood and their years growing up a lot closer, with them being neighbors their entire life and becoming of age for a lot of pivotal moments at the exact same time. And I appreciate how in these flashbacks it takes us to McCorley's old alehouse, which is where Steve and Vision went, or Jim Hammond at the time, back in issue 7, when Steve was like, I don't need a map, I can find this place. And he went on to tell Jim how it was here, where he nearly got beat to death by the American Nazi Party. And he was like, man, I was 16 and stone sober when I threw the first punch. So it's cool that that memory is included in the montage that shows us what Bucky and Steve have been through over the years, especially at a time when they had more common ideals. And following this, we jump to the tragic moment when Steve's mom passed, just before we get into their time at war, starting with Bucky heading into battle first and Steve joining him in the field later on as Captain America. Though I imagine with the two of them being the same age, it's possible that Steve might have been Captain America for a little bit longer, but in this case, we'd be talking about less than a year, like months. And for these two, another difference that we see is a telling of a story where Captain America was believed to have been dead, instead of Bucky. Because on Earth 616, Steve Rogers is haunted with the memory of watching his best friend die. But in the Ultimate Universe, this basically played out the other way around, because when Steve was believed to have been dead, and the war ended, Bucky came home. But as the years passed, going through the 50s on to the early 60s, this of course led to the arrival of the Maker and the changes that came thereafter. But in the here and now, with Cap actually being able to see Bucky's face and look him in the eye, even with Cap doing the whole "Bucky, is that you?" he knew the truth in his gut from the moment he met the Grand Skull. But this continues to play out with Bucky saying, Surprised you recognize me. The years haven't been as kind to me as they have to you, but then I actually lived them. But then that's where Cap asks Bucky, why? And that question pisses Bucky off because then he pulls out the whole mech suit and he tells Cap, you don't get to ask me why. And Cap tells him, like, you betrayed the people, everything we fought for. And Bucky's just like, I betrayed them. Me? They took apart everything we fought for. You weren't even there. I was there. No one cared. They were happy, celebrating in the streets. And that's where Steve is like, so you gave up? And Bucky says, gave up? I ran for Congress a dozen times, while there still was one. I tried to make a difference, but government was already going out of fashion. The new thinking went there was nothing between people but self-interest. Checks and balances, church and state, constitutions, they were all discredited. One by one, the whole democratic system was declared a failure. They were, quote, unequal to meet the needs of the modern man, end quote. The maker was building a new world, and there was no stopping it. And that's where Steve's like, then die trying. And now it's that kind of talk that just has Bucky like, oh, same old line, huh? And mind you, throughout this, Steve tried to get his shield bounce off to catch Bucky from behind, only for his suit to catch it. So he then smacks Steve in the face with his own shield. But then Bucky tells him, you would have been proud of me, Steve. I refused to be a part of it, like I knew you would have. I settled for a normal life, fixing cars, but pretty soon the cars fixed themselves. I couldn't keep a job after that. I could never prove it, but I had a feeling I'd been marked, a permanent black spot on my record. Or maybe I just wasn't good for anything but killing. And as Bucky continues, it's this next part that he talks about that's like the pivotal moment. Because next he tells Steve, one day I woke up and I realized I was going to die of terminal liver failure. And he tells Steve here, after being a hero, after helping win the war, he lost everything. He lost his country when the Maker took over. He lost Steve when he believed that he was dead. And all for what? And this had Bucky like, I could take dying for something, but I couldn't take dying for nothing. And that's why when Nick Fury offered him a dose of the Infinity Formula in exchange for his services, it's right there where Bucky's like, they had me. Because Bucky was told that they needed him to go undercover, long term, and take his position, presumably to wheel in the Red Skulls. So at this point, we're likely talking about the 80s, since that organization took their inspiration from the Frank Castle of this universe in the 70s. But Bucky goes on to say here how at first it didn't seem like anything changed, except they didn't vote because the hard decisions were made by the higher ups, and it seemed like that was what the people wanted. But then Bucky says here, it doesn't seem very different until one day you realize how different your life is, how much of yourself you lost, given away, but by then it's too late. And it's kind of ironic how in this moment, Cap is turning this shield return into another attack, and by the time Bucky realizes it, it's a little too late. And now it's here where Cap drags his twin out the mech, where Bucky tells him, you can't kill me, Steve. So Steve's like, no, why not? And Bucky says the same reason I can't kill you, because we're brothers, because that means something, and because my heart's connected to a large bomb by a dead man's trigger. If it stops beating, a room full of kids and pregnant women goes boom. But Steve tells him, nah, we were warned about that, so the women and children are safe. And even though Cap doesn't go into the details here, we know this is all thanks to his trusty sidekick, the Red Skull. But at this point, Bucky, he has nothing left, so he's just like, okay, Steve, okay, you got me. Then when Steve tells him like, no, I don't get you at all. And Bucky lets him know that it's simple. And he's like, first you say and do all these horrible things and you hate yourself, but it's okay because in your heart, you know that you're just pretending. It's not you, it's a performance. After a while pretending, you stop hating yourself for it. You can only hate yourself for so long. Survival mechanism, I guess. A while longer, the things you say start to make sense. After all, it is your voice. And you begin to see your own point. And then it's not a performance anymore. Then you believe it, down to your bones. And that just has Steve like, Buck. And Bucky pours his heart out, because now he's like, I don't want to die. Please, Steve, please. You weren't there. You don't know. I was afraid and alone. I was so alone. And Steve tells him, okay, Buck, it's okay. You're not alone. I'm here. You're my brother. I will always take care of you. And Bucky just goes on like, thank you, Steve. Thank you. I'm sorry. So sorry. And Steve tells him, me too, Buck. Me too. Just before cracking his neck. So yeah, it's really a tragic story. The story of Bucky Barnes and Steve Rogers of Earth 6160. And it just has me thinking, man, like had Bucky been okay with dying for nothing, then he could have been a part of this. Because when Jim Hammond went back in time to set up things for the future as part of the Ultimates 3.0, Bucky Barnes could have been a part of that. But because he made the choice to become the Grand Skull, this made him a significant part of history that Vision wasn't allowed to change. So fast forward to now with Cap taking him out, in a way it's almost like mercy, because otherwise capital punishment was waiting on this man. But at least this way there's a chance that he'll just be remembered as a hero. Let me know what you guys think. And so now real quick, I want to give a special shout out to all the patrons. Thank you guys for all of your support. And for anyone who's new here, who wants more information on how to support the channel, I got a link below where you can go to patreon.com/dopespill. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again on the next one. Alright, later.